All right. Hello, everybody, and thank you for attending StreamTV Growth Summit. My name is Kevin Gray, and I'm going to be your host for today. Before we get started, I'd just like to thank our sponsors for this week's event. TiVo, Beachfront, Bitmovin, Salesforce, Symphony Media AI, Think Analytics, and Vivo for their support of this week's event. This morning's session is titled Ad-Supported Growth Deep Dive, the keys to building and monetizing a loyal audience. For this particular session, we've got a great panel lined up with speakers from Crackle Plus, Xumo, TiVo, and Beachfront to help us talk about this issue. We really want this session to be engaging as possible, so be sure to submit your questions using the questions and answers tab on the left side of your screen. With that being said, let's go ahead and get things started. Moderating this panel is Adam Weiner, founder at Continuous Media. Adam, over to you.
Thank you very much, Kevin. I appreciate the invite here, and I love the idea of this entire summit. I think it's really the key thing that everyone is focused on, growth in all its permutations. I would like to, of course, acknowledge, Kevin, you and your work that you've done to put this together. So, and your team, thank you very much. People on the back end working hard, appreciate that. For the people in attendance, thrilled to have you listen in and be part of this. In the chat in the window, you'll see that there's an opportunity for you to chat away amongst yourselves. I would also encourage you all to, if you want, to write literally a one-sentence description of what you do, who you are and what you do. One sentence, try to make it pithy. And then there's a Q&A tab. You'll notice that. That's where, if you would like to ask a question of the panelists, that's the place where you would do that. So, submit your questions there, and hopefully we get around to that towards the end of the session, because there's a lot to talk about. And to that end, I'd like to invite all of the panelists here to introduce themselves. So we're going to go around the horn here. We're going to start just to off to my side here with Fern, then Tom, then Walt, and then Jason. So Fern, take it away.
Hello, everyone, and good morning. My name is Fern Feistel. I'm currently the Executive Director of Marketing and Content Operations at Xumo, where I manage both the onboarding of channels, the programming of channels on Xumo, as well as the discovery of those channels and the programming therein.
Great. Good morning, everyone. My name is Tom St. John. I run the supply ecosystem for Beachfront, and we work with lots of media owners and programmers providing programmatic ad tech that helps them unify their ad decisioning and monetize across all their TV screens. It's great to be here.
Hi, good morning. I'm Walt Horstman from TiVo. I lead our monetization business, which includes our advertising business, and we're very focused on the growth in connected TV advertising as it relates, of course, to stream and this discussion. And we also have a TV data licensing business, which we're using to inform much of our targeting and measurement of our CTV business.
And hi, good morning. Jason Schaefer here from Crackle Plus, head of growth, which includes business development, marketing, and BI. I'm back in the office, and it's our first day back for our whole team. So I was the first one here and kicked off with this video conference. So great to see everybody.
Well, thank you very much for all of those intros, and glad to see you're back in the office, Jason. I think that a lot of us are interested in doing the same, maybe. So the title of this session is about the keys to building and monetizing a loyal audience. And monetizing is put in parentheses there, but for all of us, obviously they're part and parcel of one another, right? You've got to maintain building the audience. You've got to figure out ways to monetize that audience as best you can. So that's what we're going to focus on today. And obviously, as all of you represent sort of different aspects of that ecosystem. So first, we're going to start with just a discussion around the audience. And so one of the challenges, and I should just say that there will be times in this conference, in this session, where I will reference my previous work at Viacom CBS because I was there. I started the CBS and local streams, and which was an ad-supported initiative. So I may reference that as points of examples in framing questions. So just so everybody understands. But let's first talk about the challenge, as I like to say, of discovery, right? So because building an audience, let's focus first on the audience. Building an audience is difficult, right? It starts with great content, but one of the things that is really critical is understanding how to get people to know that your content is even there, and deliver on the promise of what that content is. So I guess first, why don't we start with Fern? Why don't you kick it off? Especially considering your focus on the programming and the marketing.
Yeah, at Xumo, so when we program, we work very closely with content partners. And for example, like Crackle as a channel on Xumo, we would work very closely with them to understand tentpole programming and what's coming up that we can align with current day-to-day or relevant activities or holidays, so that we can best align with what consumers want to watch. And we have found that organically really drives a lot of growth for channels, as well as building audiences, and it helps to build credibility on the platform. And so our marketing team is very tuned into building robust editorial calendars that we share with content partners as well as with distribution partners, so that we can best promote and surface that content that consumers want to discover, but don't necessarily want to spend a ton of time looking for. So we are very sure to make sure that content is first and foremost front and center, and that we're putting our best foot forward upon first launch and or return when users return back to Xumo.
Yeah, thanks, Fern. And I guess I should just say that, all of us are focused on audience building, right? Even thinking about the monetization pieces, even the technical aspects of it. It's really about the growth of the audience and how best to deliver on that. So, as an example, I know I'm going to cut quickly to Walt here, put you a little bit on the spot. I know that your focus is on the monetization piece, but I do know that, TiVo is a group that helps power experiences as well. So I know that while that might not be exactly your focus, I know that you know enough about it that you could speak a little bit to the benefits that when you're having those conversations with TiVo's having conversations with partners to power their discovery engines or their interfaces. What are some of the things that may have been said or heard that are challenges towards that end?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's I think there are two areas where we have incorporated a lot of data into driving personalized content recommendations. And we've been doing this for a number of years across the TiVo footprint, and also provide a service to other content providers. And we look at it in sort of two areas. One is when a user comes into, especially a streaming service, there's very high churn within the critical 15 to 30-day window as that consumer is learning about what content is available. And so to address that, we have put together what we call a first-time user experience optimization, where we engage the consumer, understand what their preferences are, and then from that start surfacing immediately content that is relevant for that user. And what we have found is a reduction in churn during that critical 15-day window of about 30%. So the economics prove out very, very clearly for that. And then following that, as the consumer continues to use the content services, both linear and streaming, if it's a unified platform, then we are continuously understanding what are the viewership trends, preferences, whether that be time of day, whether it be day of week, to understand what is specifically the behavior of that user, and can make relevant recommendations. And through that, we have found that when a consumer is watching a piece of content that we have surfaced through a recommendation, it increases overall viewership by 4x versus having no recommendation. So I think this entire space is very much focused on having relevant, timely, accurate data to get the consumer to the content that they want to find, watch, and enjoy. And that is critical, of course, to building the audience, and then from there, the monetization.
You mentioned data, and we're going to get to a discussion around data and data normalization in a little while. But just continuing on the audience piece for a moment here, and maybe this touches on some of that the data points. I mean, everything is really wrapped up in a data discussion on some level. And Jason, maybe you want to jump in here to talk a little bit about, I guess my question would be more about the value of viewers as it relates to audience development. And just understanding how you and your team evaluate existing channels, how you think about creating new channels. And Fern, I would assume you have some thoughts here as well. Is there something that you is there a standard sort of metric? Is there a standard sort of equation that comes into play?
Yeah, so like everybody, we're eyes on the prize with the lifetime value of our user, the cost of acquiring a new user. And where we're spending a lot of cycles right now is understanding both the ability to monetize as well as the revenue generated from branded applications versus fast channels. And so those users have very different value propositions to us. We're ad supported. We don't have a subscription business. So our economics are such that we need to show a pre-roll and then an ad pod in a measurable way. And on the apps, it's very formulaic. You get a pre-roll, and then every 10 to 15 minutes, you get an ad pod, and you can control frequency, and you can control a lot of the user monetization variables. With fast channels, which is a little bit newer for us, it's a little bit more difficult. You have blank slate at the end of a show if it doesn't hit the full hour mark. And so we're constantly trying to learn on how to properly monetize those users. I think their fast channel users are jumping around a little bit more. Once you open an app, the retention's a little bit higher. You're there for a reason. There's more intent. Whereas fast channels, maybe they surf around a little bit more. The EPG style is more, it's more, they're more willing to test. And so we are playing a lot more with how we're monetizing and merchandising our content, what we're surfacing, testing our driver titles versus our originals. And, I don't think we're at the end zone yet and have a perfect blueprint, but it's where we're spending a lot of our energy today.
Yeah, and to that end, Tom, I would ask you to jump in here to talk a little bit about, as your group works with partners to help them power basically the underlying advertising experience and make that decisioning. As you work with your clients, how focused are they on understanding that impact that decisioning has on the audience retention, or that audience moving around, and how best to keep them? And I guess there's a programmatic discussion here as well, and I know that you probably all have thoughts on that.
Yeah, for sure. I think programmatic in particular, and your ad strategy overall can play a really important role in driving your audience strategy as well, specifically through the lens of retention. Because we talk a lot about fast channels booming and people looking for ad-supported models more because of the subscription fatigue that users experience. There's mid and long tail content being consumed in a broader way across so many touch points now, and so a robust marketplace for demand is really important to supporting that. And it's not necessarily economically viable for every content owner to drive sell through of all and fill of all their inventory through direct sales alone. So, if you have programmatic partners that can help you make sure you're still delivering that quality user experience as well as driving the revenue that you need, it's a big piece of the equation. Specific to audience retention, it becomes really important to manage things like advertising load, manage ad fatigue, right? If users on certain platforms or certain distribution endpoints having a different experience than others, how do you optimize for that? And how do you understand sort of, the data and the KPIs that tie back to that user engagement? So, working with within your ad serving ecosystem to deal with that, and everything that goes down to even pod construction. I think Jason mentioned about, having blank slates and all of this. This all ties back to how the user perceives the engagement with your content, and whether or not they see it as seamless. They look at it, right? TV is one thing, and they don't expect a different experience on broadcast than they do on connected. And so we need to live up to that and make sure that the ad experience doesn't take away from the consumption.
Yeah, and I'd like to add to that. I think, just as Jason and Tom were mentioning, like FAST is very different from potentially just AVOD, even, where you may have a little bit more control. And at Xumo, where it's 100% FAST. And so, managing those ad loads and managing a different type of ad strategy per channel even is a challenge, but it's something that at Xumo, it's very important to us because it directly impacts engagement and audience growth. If a consumer has a bad experience on one channel, they may not choose to surf to another channel. And so, keeping that engagement, keeping that return rate up with the audience really directly correlates to the ads and to that ad experience that we have. So, managing pods, managing pod duration, potentially cutting those pods short because we're noticing that engagement is dipping on the consumption side of things. We are working very hard to manage and retain control over that so that, we can always be optimizing as we move forward and continue to build.
I guess I would just want something that Tom referenced here is robust demand marketplace is a really critical piece here. And that makes me think about sort of the distribution piece in this and the different basically models that happen with distribution partners. And, you may have a full control of your ad stack, and sometimes you don't. Sometimes it's inventory sharing. Sometimes it's the backfill is handled through another partner, through a distribution partner, where you may not have as much control of that ad experience. And so, I guess my question for you is how do you work with those distribution partners, or if you are helping to power some of those conversations, to make certain that nobody wants a slate, right? That's the bottom line here is like a slate has lost revenue. And so, obviously there can be deal terms and contract terms that can help somewhat alleviate that, but, how receptive is that distribution discussion for making certain that ad load happens, and even thinking about things like, repeating ads and frequency capping, et cetera, as part of that. Anybody?
I would jump in and say we've done quite a bit of work, especially in our programmatic ad stack, to ensure that we are filtering, determining what a high quality ad is. I think we learned early on that we would receive a whole series of ads that basically didn't fit aspect ratios, didn't fit quality specs. And so when that ad then appeared on screen, it was a poor consumer experience. We've done quite a bit of work on our own, and then also in conjunction with our content partners, for which we have inventory share deals, really to ensure that it is a highest quality ad experience, and that we're filtering out anything that doesn't qualify.
On our side, when we do work with distribution partners very closely on the on each model, I should say, because it does differ. It does depend on the deal terms, and we do work with them very closely to make sure that it's in everyone's both best interests, I should say, for backfill and for when ads do get served and whose demand we're pulling from and things like that. So there's a lot of work up front that goes into the integration part before we even go live, to make sure that there's all the testing that happens, all the different scenarios are played out, so that we can minimize any downtime or any slates that may show. They may be pretty slates, but still, like you said, we do want to monetize. So there's an entire process that goes into place with making sure all the ad tags are set up correctly, pulling demand from all the various sources, and making sure that if this happens, then this happens, or if this doesn't happen, then that happens, and making sure that it's all smooth.
Yeah, and you need someone to be able to reconcile when you're seeing the same creative from multiple DSPs, right? It's something we focus a lot on. You've got one creative ID through one DSP being bid in the same pod as another creative that might actually have a different ID but be the same ad coming through. And so you have to think about that as you're assembling that pod holistically and have backups in case you have a duplicate ad. It's something that we do through our ad library approach, but it's becoming more and more of a base level need for programmers to sort of deal with the complications around that pod environment. So.
Yeah, and I'll add one other thought. In addition to this, the economics are quickly changing for the publisher. Historically, we would retain sales rights and we would cut a revenue share back. And then the model started to evolve to an inventory share where maybe we would split it 60-40, 50-50. Now some of the bigger platforms are saying, if you want distribution on our channels, we want 100% sales rights. And that becomes very tricky, right, for content owners to relinquish control of their monetization vehicle and give the bigger platforms 100% sales rights, because you're now not only not in control of your monetization, but then they start to have a much bigger impact on frequency, on all the things that you had mentioned with the consumer experience. And so we're trying to navigate, how to play in this world where if you do want carriage on the bigger AVOD platforms, do you want to give sales rights away?
That's an excellent point, Jason. And I can say that it's very hard to pass up a distribution deal with the biggest players, right? When a device has 50% of penetration into the U.S., it's hard to say no to that organization. And you all know who I'm talking about as an example, right? So as you have these conversations about that, is there any obviously I came from Viacom CBS for many years, and we have very deep relationship sales history. And so, it's obviously things are happening, moving and changing with more programmatic style, direct marketplace type of deals. But it's some of those, and many of those are still rooted in a relationship. And so I would assume, and I know that we try to use this to our advantage in the conversations that we would have with platforms, saying we can extract better rates because of who we are and the leverage that we have across multiple different things. I would assume that maybe the same kind of conversation can happen. Of course, it's different, I would assume, for everybody in how much they have to offer. But I don't know if anybody has any comment on that, about how, tactics for having those conversations. I don't want to get too far into the weeds and deal structures and negotiation tactics, but, I think, Jason, you make an excellent point.
I can respond. We believe we can get higher rates, and we're very protective that we want to always be able to sell sponsorships. We're building more and more originals, and we want to control that custom ad experience. Our challenge is when you're negotiating with some of these platforms, there's a whole new world where they've got on-glass ACR data now. Some of the platforms are requiring you to implement and build technology into the content experience that allows them to extract data variables that you could only dream of. And so the balance of power is always a push and pull, but in some of these cases it is very one-sided and not on the content publishers in the content publisher's favor.
Yeah, I guess this leads right into the discussion, in my opinion, of the challenges of cross-platform data normalization, and that the timelines, what is being tracked, even just there's obviously the audience, the content sort of decisioning that is made through data, programming decisions that are made through data, but then there's the ad pieces that are made through data, the decisioning there, and there seems to be a lot of walled gardens, right? And so your access to that data for all of you can be challenging. And what I guess the question that this leads to is what I think we discussed in a previous call, which is what are your hopes for what could happen there with regards to the normalization of data? And do you think that it is actually there could be a solution? Obviously, there's companies out there, Nielsen for one, trying to make strides in this area as they normally would. But there's a lot of pushback, and there's a lot of companies that are looking at other solutions. What are your sort of hopes there as far as being able to coalesce data in a really a way that you can make the decisions you need to make, regardless of which part of the ecosystem you're in? I don't know if anybody wants to jump in.
Yeah, I mean, specifically.
Go ahead,
Walt.
Tom first, then Walt.
Okay.
So, I mean, there's obviously a lot happening there, Adam, in terms of different pieces of data, whether it's audience, identity, or measurement. One area that's super near and dear to our heart, and that we've been banging the drum on for a while, is content metadata. I think just as an underlying, foundational piece of things when it comes to transacting programmatically, we need to normalize things like content metadata, and because it's just key to driving a TV-like buying and selling experience in CTV. In traditional program level content info has been table stakes for a long time, but it just hasn't translated to CTV yet, and especially not in programmatic channels. So, in order to be able to transact at scale, we need better systems in place and an agreed upon framework that everyone uses. For example, we've got, OpenRTB provides a set of standard parameters for passing things like content genre, but doesn't provide the actual taxonomy. So you've got different programmers doing things totally different ways. You could have a sports program that's categorized as sports, another one that's very similar categorized as football, on down the line, and everyone does it kind of the way they choose. And it's pretty confusing, right? If you're on the agency or a buy side. And so I think, it's increasingly important as traditional and connected TVs converge more and more, which is, how we spend all of our time thinking about this. And really, basically, I just think of it as a simple concept. An analogy I always like to apply to it is that, if you're going shopping for a new car as a buyer, you want to be able to compare one vehicle to another and understand what you're getting for your money. I just don't think that's too much to ask. And it's not really much different in the world of, surfacing content to buyers programmatically. We need to provide them more ammo for what is, the inventory they're bidding on, so that we can drive the highest value from it. So we need to continue to move that along incrementally for the health of the ecosystem.
And I would add to that what we're finding from most of the advertisers and agencies as they're thinking about their CTV strategy, it is very much in conjunction with their linear strategy. And so understanding how viewership, ad exposure on linear then relates to their CTV planning is really, really important. And so as I mentioned, we have a whole host of TV viewership data, which is nationally representative across the country from a variety of sources. And we find that a number of advertisers like the capability to drive incremental reach on their CTV. So we will pull the exposed households from their linear TV campaign and suppress those, and then create an audience target based on whatever behavioral characteristics the advertiser is interested in, and then use that to target on CTV across a broad footprint. And so what that ultimately does is maximize incremental reach so that they are getting the most value from their CTV campaign relative to their linear campaign. And it even extends beyond just viewership, where we're now exploring normalizing linear TV viewership with then app usage based on both our TV data and then on our streaming apps, so that certain advertisers not only want to take into account what has happened on their linear campaign, but then what are the audience characteristics based on app viewership or app engagement, to use that as a targeting mechanism. So what I'm seeing is lots of normalization, lots of integration of data sources across a variety of platforms to really hone in on the optimal target and then drive effective measurement from putting all of these platforms together.
That's excellent. Those are excellent points, Walt. And obviously, TiVo is in an interesting position because of that look across linear habits as well, which some of the traditional media companies obviously have that too. But then there's there's the other side of this equation, which are specifically CTV or OTT distribution only, right? A lot of the content may still be coming from companies that are creating still have linear distribution that's a line share for them, or is morphing. And I guess there's a conversation to be had around on the buy side about how budgets are moving and what that really means for how you plan. The question really here is, in the conversations that you're having about monetization, how demanding, and I would assume the answer is fairly demanding, are the clients in giving you the specific data needs that they have to make to meet their needs for to spend money with you, basically. I don't know if any of you have any insight into that, Jason or Fern, specifically with your distribution models.
Yeah, I think there's two different types of requests we get from our buy side partners. Transactional media, when they're buying 15s and 30s from us, they don't put a lot of requirements on us as a content publisher, because their buying goes through a DSP and they've got all the targeting parameters, to make their age, gender, psychographic, KPIs seen. Where we get more or additional requirements is when we sponsor an original or do a takeover or something that's a little bit more custom. And then finding that Venn diagram of our audience and what they're looking for becomes a little bit more tricky. And then, of course, you've got the reach frequency issue, as always, of if they're either underwriting one of our originals or sponsoring one of the originals, how do we make sure that we hit enough reach to fulfill their KPI, in addition to the targeting, which is related but a different issue. So I don't know if I'm answering your question directly, but those are the two things that we always play with.
No, that's good clarification.
Yeah, and I would add, there's I think a lot of the
I
work
don't know if anyone.
that is happening in the industry now and will continue is forecasting, because I believe the advertisers are getting very sophisticated in their audience targets. I mean, the great thing of CTV is it's the promise that everybody has been waiting for 20 years, which is I get to now have a video product with all of the targeting and optimization capability in flight on video. So the best of TV and the best of digital, and I think one of the challenges is forecasting the delivery capability against a campaign based on various target segments, and then add on different frequency caps, because that's becoming a more and more important topic. And advertisers want to ensure, just like they have in the world of television, that, okay, can my budget be delivered within this time period? Because that ties into all of the historic planning and buying cycles. And I think that's an area where we're focused on. That's an area where I think the industry will just continue to get better, is doing that forecasting.
Tom, you have any comments on that? I'm assuming, with inventory management, forecasting is at the heart of that.
Yeah, we hear a lot from the major broadcasters kind of that are moving more toward kind of wanting a single platform that they can not only forecast but do trafficking and reporting through no matter where the inventory lies. And I think that's the dream, right? That's what we're all kind of running at here. So even things like tying it back into their order management system, so that direct deals and programmatic can be managed side by side. I think that's a lot of where the next step is, and we've been spending a lot of time product wise and partnership wise to help that effort along. It'll continue to be a big theme so that traditional TV budgets can extend seamlessly into connected and other digital channels. So all ties back to the interoperability,
Which is still, it's a lot of heavy lifting, interoperability. So hopefully we all get there. We only have about 5 minutes left. I know that, if there's, again, I want to remind the attendees, if they have questions, feel free to enter them in the Q&A. We'll try to get to something. But I want to shift back to audience for a moment and talk about retention. And it's, obviously growth is important, but retention is, you can't have growth if you're not keeping the people around who are who are the basis to grow from. So especially as it relates to OEMs, TV manufacturers are getting, really getting into the fast game. They have a lot of them have their own offerings. So some of them are powered by other companies. Some have built their own versions. But it's certainly a way where as a consumer, you're buying a TV. You don't necessarily need to plug it into anything other than the Wi-Fi and power, and you can stream things in a live sort of look and feel with fast channels specifically. Maybe Fern, maybe you want to jump in and talk a little bit about how certain tactics that you might focus on specifically for retention, and what it is, how you value that user versus the acquisition of a new user.
Yeah, I think we all here measure, lifetime value, and that becomes a key, a key KPI for all of us. And like you said, it is different. The tactics that we use between new users and return users are different. And I should say, starting with the presentation of content at launch is different altogether, categorically between new and return. And that's based on behaviors that we've seen in either for return users in past sessions or new users based on what we've seen works well in getting for users that have a high lifetime value for us. And so our algorithms are always weighing those differences and weighing, the different components that go into what drives a higher lifetime value. So, whether that's the first channel that's presented or whether that's a movie that's presented upon first view, it all depends on what we've seen work well in most recent viewing behaviors. Because Xumo does not, we don't collect logins, we don't collect profiles, and so it's all based on viewing behaviors. It is all anonymized, and so while our users value that, it does make it difficult for us on our side. So we do try and, carefully, use the data very carefully to inform those decisions and drive retention. And we've seen that is starting to help. I also want to point out that it does differ between platform. For example, set-top boxes, those users are very different from potentially a smart TV user, different again from a mobile user. And so we do have to pay attention to those users and the viewing behaviors. It's not all going into one data soup. It's different, and we keep it separate. And that has helped drive different return rates and different retention statistics per platform. And we're using, each of those stats to drive or inform, decisions moving forward.
Yeah, and I'm assuming a lot of things you just said, Jason, I would assume on the Crackle Plus side is you would echo those. But as unfortunately we're at time, we have about a little over a minute left, and I guess everybody hates and loves the last question I'm going to ask. If you could give a very quick answer, 20 seconds or less, each one of you, about what you think is the most important thing that will be for you to focus on or your company to focus on in the next, say, year. Fern, we'll start with you. We'll go to Tom, Walt, and then Jason.
Yeah, actually, this is perfect segue, because this is a big priority for me and my team is retention and audience growth and understanding that first experience for different types of users. And so that's a big thing for us this year and into next year, is figuring that out and seeing if we can positively impact those numbers with different tactics of the different experience that people have upon launch.
Yeah, really quickly, as it relates to audience growth at Beachfront, the biggest thing I think we can do in terms of priority is arming content owners with more data to be smart about their strategies, helping them surface it, and being the kind of resident expert.
I think we're focused on continuing to unify all of our various data sets, whether those are our data sets or whether those are coming from an advertiser or from another party, and joining those together to forecast. As advertisers, as I mentioned, increasingly want to take advantage of very precise targeting, then forecasting and data unification is critical to that.
For Crackle Plus, it's share of mind for the consumer. We're launching a new brand this year, and we're launching new fast channels. And so breaking through with all the new competition and awareness with the consumer is very top of mind for us.
Okay, I want to thank you all for participating. Obviously, some themes there for the upcoming year, really centered around retention data, attracting new users, forecasting. These are all, what's old is new, and I want to thank you all for participating, and of course thank Kevin for making all this happen with his team. And I'm going to throw it back to Kevin to take us on to the next thing. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Adam. And thank you to everyone for attending our opening session this morning. Please join us back here at 1 p.m. Eastern for our next session, OTT Subscription Growth Deep Dive. finding and acquiring the next million subs, where we're going to really talk about the subscription side of things. On behalf of our team, I would like to thank all our speakers for participating this morning, as well as today's sponsors, TiVo and Beachfront, for supporting. Thanks again, and we'll see you back here at 1 p.m. Eastern.